Records confirm your muscles do not actually fail when you quit. Your brain actively shuts them down long before you reach your physical limit. In 1903, an exhausted researcher in a London basement threw his notes into a furnace, convinced his work was a failure. But here's the strange part: the chemicals he discarded actually contained the exact compound that would later cure syphilis. Why does the human brain systematically perceive a temporary setback as a permanent dead end? Psychologists call this impact bias, a glitch where your mind assumes today's emotional pain will stretch on forever. We are wired to project current darkness into an infinite future. But wait, is your exhaustion actually telling you the truth about your limits, or is it merely a chemical trick played by an anxious brain? What nobody expected was that the breaking point is actually a biological illusion. For decades, sports scientists insisted that the human body possessed an absolute physiological limit, a hard ceiling where muscles simply seize. Everyone believed this until 1996, when physiologist Tim Noakes discovered the central governor theory. Records confirm that your muscles do not actually run out of oxygen when you feel completely spent. Instead, your brain intentionally triggers feelings of extreme fatigue at just 65% of your actual physical capacity to keep you safe. The exhaustion you feel is not a physical reality, it is a conservative estimation designed to make you stop early. But this raises a deeper question: if your brain is lying to protect you, how do you distinguish between actual danger and a mere warning signal? In 1879, Thomas Edison was not just hunting for a light bulb filament, he was battling imminent bankruptcy. Records show his primary investor threatened to pull all funding after his 9,000th failed attempt. But wait, historians argue his genius was not his intellect, but his unique relationship with data. While his assistants saw 9,000 defeats, Edison famously classified them as 9,000 successful demonstrations of what did not work. Everything changed when he tried a carbonized bamboo thread, a material most engineers deemed absurdly fragile. It burned for over 1,200 hours. The very vulnerability of the material was what made it work. But what if the next attempt is just another dead end? The most important clue appears much later. What actually happens inside your brain when you are on the verge of quitting? Neuroscientists at University College London recently mapped the precise chemical shift that occurs right before a subject abandons a difficult task. They found a sudden, sharp drop in dopamine levels, accompanied by a spike in adenosine. This chemical cocktail literally blindfolds your prefrontal cortex, making future rewards seem completely worthless. You do not quit because you lack willpower, you quit because your brain's internal cost-benefit calculator has been chemically hacked by fatigue. But here is the critical part: this chemical dip always bottoms out exactly before the brain is forced to adapt. Your deepest despair is actually a biological transition phase. In 1985, inside a damp concrete cell on Robben Island, prisoner number 46664 faced a terrifying choice. Nelson Mandela had spent 22 years in isolation, his health failing, his movement fractured. Documents confirm the South African government offered him freedom on one condition: bypass his principles and compromise. It would have been incredibly easy to walk away and live a quiet life. Instead, Mandela chose to remain in that cell for 5 more agonizing years. What nobody expected was that this final, most painful period of confinement was exactly what cemented his authority as an unshakable leader. His ultimate victory was born directly from the refusal to accept an easy escape from his darkest hour. In 1995, a broke single mother sat in a drafty Edinburgh cafe, staring at 12 rejection letters for a manuscript about a boy wizard. Publishers insisted the book was far too long for children and that she should find a day job. J.K. Rowling had only enough money for rent, yet she refused to let the 12 rejections define her reality.
But wait, the 13th publisher only accepted the book because the chairman's 8-year-old daughter was handed the first chapter and refused to stop reading. A multi-billion-dollar empire hung on the whim of a single child. What if that child had been asleep? The terrifying truth is that major breakthroughs often depend on tiny, unpredictable variables you cannot control.
At age 65, Harlan Sanders was broke, living off a tiny social security check after his roadside restaurant was bypassed by a new highway. He had nothing left but a recipe for fried chicken and an old car. For 2 years, he slept in his vehicle, pitching restaurant owners across America. Witnesses described him being laughed out of kitchens over 1,000 times before a single owner in Utah said yes. The assumption is that youth is required for massive success, but the data says otherwise. Sanders proved that the cumulative weight of a lifetime of failures can actually create the perfect foundation for a late-stage breakthrough. But why does society believe your potential expires at 40? In 1985, Steve Jobs was publicly humiliated and ousted from Apple, the very company he founded in his parents' garage. He was 30 years old, wealthy, but utterly directionless. He felt like an absolute failure. Yet, he later admitted that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to him. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. During this dark exile, he founded Next in Pixar, developing the exact operating system that would eventually save Apple from bankruptcy upon his return in 1997. The catastrophic loss of his identity was the only path to acquiring the tools that would eventually reshape the digital world. In 1977, a young television co-anchor in Baltimore was abruptly demoted from the evening news because she was deemed too emotionally involved in her stories. Her producers explicitly told her she was unfit for television news. That anchor was Oprah Winfrey. Instead of hardening her heart or quitting the medium entirely, Winfrey embraced her natural empathy, leaning into the very quality her critics despised. This rejection did not destroy her, it forced her into talk television, where her emotional depth became her greatest asset. The very trait that made her a failure in a traditional newsroom became the foundation of a media empire. Why do we let institutions define our strengths? Let us step away from the famous names and look at something closer. There was a moment in my own journey where I stood in my office at midnight, looking at a screen filled with red metrics. Every project I had launched that year had quietly collapsed. I watched peers online celebrate major milestones while I calculated how many weeks of savings I had left before I had to pack up. I almost quit. If you are honest with yourself, you have been there too. The world only celebrates the finished monument, never the quiet panic of the person laying the foundation in the dark. But those failed attempts were not wasted, they were training runs. Why does the human journey always seem to require this terrible, silent stretch before the finish line? In biology, this is known as the pupal stage of a butterfly. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar does not grow wings, it completely dissolves into a lifeless, chemical soup. If you cut the chrysalis open during this phase, you will not find a half-formed insect, you will find nothing but liquid ruin. The collapse of the old structure is not a sign of failure, it is a mechanical necessity for the new form to emerge. The darkness of your current struggle is not the absence of progress, it is the chemistry of your transformation. But this leaves us with one haunting question. Why do highly intelligent, capable people abandon dreams they were once willing to sacrifice everything for? The answer is not a lack of grit, it is the paradox of cost-benefit intelligence. Capable minds excel at projecting risk, and when the pain peaks, your intellect constructs a flawless, highly rational argument that quitting is the only logical choice. You don't abandon your dream because you are weak, you abandon it because your brain is smart enough to design a perfect alibi for your survival. The final, most dangerous trap is not failure itself, it is the sheer, undeniable intelligence of your own excuses.